Sit down. If everybody will have a seat, I think we'll go ahead and get started with the next panel, please.
All right.
Okay, everybody, we'll get started with the next panel, and let me introduce Robert Hurd, one of my colleagues on the National Advisory Council. And Robert's the managing director and a founder of Cimarron Capital Partners, an investor in venture funds and private equity. So without further ado, let me turn it over to Robert, and he will introduce our panel.
Good morning. How many federal labs do we have? How many across the country do you think we have? What's the number we quote these days? Over 300 big ones. Then we got some more that are little. Is that right? Well, I've been trying to describe to these guys who our audience is. And it's a really remarkable, diverse group of people we have in the audience. They represent technology assets in big cities and tiny communities, places like El Reno, Oklahoma, and New York City. So we have a wide variety of communities in which we reside and where we interface directly with people trying to build companies. So we're going to take today the experience here in Philadelphia, which is, we heard, the 8th largest city in the country, and compare it to wherever you happen to be, wherever you reside, and who you consider to be your local entrepreneurial ecosystem. We're very fortunate to have 3 different examples of members of the ecosystem here in Philadelphia speaking to you today. We have Mark Treybold, who's the Director of Business Development and Technology of the Technology Commercialization Group at the Ben Franklin Partnership of Southeastern Pennsylvania. We have Chuck Sacco, who's the Assistant Dean of Strategic Initiatives, the Close School of Entrepreneurship, and Director of the Lawrence Baiada Institute for Entrepreneurship at Drexel University, and Peter Mele, who's the Director of New Ventures at the University City Science Center. I'm going to have them describe who they are and what they do, so I won't read their bios for you. And so we're going to start today with Peter. And Peter, if you would give us a few minutes describing your service, your institution, and what it looks like when you go to work.
Sure. Thank you. My name is Peter Mele. I'm the Director of New Ventures at the University City Science Center. It's the largest and oldest urban research park in the country. It was created back in the mid-60s with the goal of fostering commercialization of early stage technologies. When it first started, it was focused on the chemical and aerospace industry, but as Philadelphia has become more focused on eds and meds, our focus has shifted as well. I oversee 2 of the programs there in our science and technology group. The earliest stage is the QED program, which is a proof of concept. It's pre-company. All of the IP assets still reside within the university. And the other program that I oversee is Phase 1 Ventures, which is a little further along the pipeline. The IP asset has been pulled out of the university and put into a small business entity. We provide funding, which is always everybody's biggest focus, but also, and more importantly, the business mentorship and leveraging connections, identifying where there are gaps to help de-risk the technologies, to move it along the pipeline to get to my colleagues here for that next investment. I had a meandering path to my job. I have degrees in biology, engineering, and law. I'm a corporate lawyer by training. I've done some startups out on the West Coast and then came back for grad school and did some engineering entrepreneurship, had my aha moment, and fortunately interned for an angel group here in Philadelphia and realized what I wanted to do. So what I get to do on a daily basis is work with really smart people who are trying to figure out how they can translate their underlying IP asset into a real commercial opportunity. And we've been pretty successful with that.
Thank you, Peter. Now let's go to Chuck. Tell us about your institution and how you got there.
Sure. Thanks, Robert. So again, Chuck Sacco, Drexel University. So Drexel University, if you're not familiar, is a large research institution about 20 blocks west of here, started in the late 1800s. What's distinctive about Drexel is it's considered what's called a co-op school. So when you come to Drexel, you typically come as an undergraduate for 5 years. In those 5 years, you're doing 3 6-month paid internships, and it really enables Drexel students to accelerate their careers and come out of university being much more prepared than a typical college student, which is really fantastic. We have 17,000 undergraduate students. We have medical college, law school, nursing school. So we have about 26,000 students altogether across mainly the city of Philadelphia. What's really interesting about today and our things I would like to talk about is that 5 years ago, Drexel made a strategic move to create a School of Entrepreneurship. Now, many universities have programs of entrepreneurship, so they have majors in entrepreneurship. What Drexel decided to do is create something that was very distinctive, a freestanding School of Entrepreneurship. So that's what's called it's called the Charles D. Close School for Entrepreneurship. And having launched it 5 years ago, what we've been able to do is really put heavy emphasis on developing our students as entrepreneurs across the university, no matter what their discipline. While we'll have students who major in entrepreneurship, our real goal is to enable entrepreneurship everywhere. It can be the engineering student, the computer science student, the design student, the architecture student, because our view is that everyone needs to become the entrepreneur of their life. Because the world's changing very dramatically. Technology, globalization, other macro trends are really affecting all of us, and that especially the student of today needs to be really well prepared for that. So we've built this school. We've got it up and running 5 years in. It's still very much a new venture, and with that, we have an incubator called the Baiada Institute for Entrepreneurship that I run. That's a 4,000 square foot a physical space, community space where students are working on the development of their new ideas every day. And again, we see all kinds of interesting stuff from across the spectrum. You know, many of it, you know, we want to get connected then to my peers here at the Science Center and Ben Franklin Technology Partners as those ideas get developed. My background, however, is not in academia. I'd be what you call a pracademic, a practitioner academic. Which is, you know, I came from industry. My background has primarily been in software technology companies as founder of companies, as co-founder, as manager, as executive. So I spent most of my career prior to the past 5 years working in software technologies. My connectivity to Drexel was I did my MBA there, started a company there, and spent 2 years in the incubator that I now run. So I've kind of come full circle in that and got introduced to Drexel that way, and have just had an amazing time helping to build out the program.
Thank you, Chuck. Mark, your turn.
Yeah, so I'm Mark Trable from Ben Franklin Technology Partners. Ben Franklin is best known in the region as investors in startup tech companies, but we actually are more than that. We call ourselves investors. We're not your typical VCs in that we are a nonprofit investment group. That makes us an economic development group. We do what we do to create jobs and grow wealth in the state of Pennsylvania. We are a Pennsylvania-based company. We do investments on the order of $50,000 to $1 million, and we'll typically invest in about 50 companies a year, $10 million, about 50 companies a year, across all technologies, IT, health, and what we call physical sciences, which is everything that's not IT or health. We don't only do startups. We will invest in established companies, any kind of an established company that's going to do some kind of a pivot and introduce some new product, new technology. We're willing to invest in those kinds of companies. And finally, we say tech companies. It's a very broad definition of tech. It's not just IT, software, apps. It's any new process, new material, advanced manufacturing techniques. Anybody who's even sometimes a new business model we can invest in. So it's very broad. We do a lot more than just write checks. As you can imagine, we see a lot of companies. In order to invest in 50 companies, we probably see 400 to 500 companies a year. And for every one of those companies that we meet with, it's our goal to send them away with something, even if they don't get funding. Ben Franklin has a very broad network here in the region, and we can help them open doors and make connections for them. My role at Ben Franklin as technology commercialization and business development is to meet with these companies. I tend to be the first filter for Ben Franklin. So I'll see well over 100 companies a year at all stages, and I'll spend an hour or two with them, and we'll map out a plan for what it takes to get these companies ready for an investment, or if they're ready, I'll usher them right into the process and get them started. Prior to joining Ben Franklin, I worked for St. Gobain Corporation, which is a $40 billion materials company, I'll say, French-owned, and Certainty Corporation here in the Pennsylvania area as a vice president of R&D. For St. Gobain, I was the global program manager for new product launches, and for Certainty, vice president of R&D. So my background is launching new products, is new technologies, evaluating different businesses, and I bring all that to Ben Franklin. And one thing I've learned is whether you're launching new products, whether you're commercializing products for a large company like St. Gobain or Certainty, or a startup that's one or two people, the problems are all the same. So it works out for us.
So say a little bit more, Mark, about what it looks like at Ben Franklin to get a company ready.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's all the companies, 100% of the companies that come to Ben Franklin have warts, because if they didn't, they'd go to a bank, and that's what we tell them. If they are really that good and they have all their ducks in a row, and they would qualify for bank funding, it's probably a better deal. But they can't get a loan from a bank, so they're coming to us. So, I mean, they all have holes somewhere in their business. The typical, I'm going to say, I mean, it's almost no two companies are the same, but I'm going to categorize the typical company that comes to us tends to be a technical person. The technical person is working hard on developing this technology or this product. And they believe that if they can get this product perfected, that everything else will fall into place. So many times they have no thoughts about supply chain, and I always ask the question, what if you had to manufacture 10,000 or 1 million of these things next week? What if you got an order? What would you do? They don't know. Or the opposite side is, okay, you've built the thing, now what are you going to do? How are you going to get it out there? How are you going to package it, distribute it, get it out into the market, sell it? These technical people are so focused on optimizing the product that they really don't have an idea what to do. So we identify these holes, and then again, because of our network and because we have partners like the universities and Science Center, we can reach out and help them fill those holes. We give them a plan. You deliver these ABC deliverables, and then you come back and see us. And we stick with these companies and monitor their progress. And when they check all the boxes, then we bring them back and bring them in.
You give them a checklist.
Yeah.
Here,
yeah,
go do this,
pretty
come
much.
back when you've done this.
That's what I do, yeah. When I sit with them, I say, look, here are the top 3 or top 5 things you need to work on, and when you get this done, come back and see me.
Now, Peter, you work with companies that are not yet companies. At QED, you work with just raw technologies.
Yeah, they have even more warts.
More warts?
Before
What is a wart? Tell me what is a wart? What does it look like?
It's building off of Mark's points. It's really a lot of these technical folks who are wickedly smart. They just don't comprehend, and nor should they necessarily, what it really takes to get to the commercialization stage. So I'm coming in at even an earlier stage because my successes are the ones that Mark is seeing generally, to really help them start to think about what do you actually have to do. Most of my companies and pre-company with QED, we're starting to think about how can we secure non-dilutive funding and what is it going to take, and again, building off Mark's point, putting together milestone plans and holding the teams to that. because oftentimes the researchers are coming in and they're much more focused on refining the technology and publishing papers, rightfully so. They're academics. What my job is, in main part, to help them start to think about, okay, we could go down two paths. You could produce a research report out of either of those paths, but one of those paths might be more interesting for a potential funder on the commercialization side. And that's where we start to really tap into our network. As I said, the Science Center has been around for approximately 60 years and built a huge network. We can tap people to come in and have that industry expertise to help guide the technical development in such a way that it's responsive to a real market need. And that's a huge part of what we've been trying to do. And I will say de-risk, but also de-wart. So it's more attractive when it gets to Mark's table.
So when you bring those advisors in, what paint a picture of what it looks like when they're engaged with your clients. What are they doing?
So they're really trying to put together a proof of concept plan, which is basically a hybrid between a business plan and a research study. And the research study is much easier for the academics. The business plan is more challenging, and that's where the business advisors that we engage with really help to guide. Again, there are two paths you could go down. This one is going to be more interesting to a GSK, to a Merck, and here's why we want to go down this pathway. And the fact that they're bringing decades, the business advisors are bringing decades of experience to the table, that really helps to encourage the academics to say, okay, let's go down that pathway.
Is it tough to find advisors like that?
It depends. Sorry, that was my lawyer hat. Philadelphia has a huge community of pharma people, diagnostic people, device people. So we don't have too much trouble finding people, but we're always looking to engage with additional people because the breadth of the technologies, we engage with 22 different research institutions in the greater Philadelphia area. The breadth of the technologies coming through our door is immense, so we're always looking to expand our network, but we've got a really solid core here.
22 research institutions. So I thought you were just working with, well, okay, so generally, University Science Center is in fact a consortium of multiple universities.
We have 31 shareholders.
31, that is correct. So Chuck, when you work at Drexel, you're with students primarily, correct? People
Primarily.
that are still, are they graduate students or undergraduate students?
Primarily undergrad, some grad though. Yeah.
And
We're seeing them before there's not enough surface area for warts. That's one I'm.
You can't find one
They
yet.
haven't even developed. They haven't even
They're too
developed the warts
fresh.
yet. That's the end of the spectrum on that.
Yeah. And so do you use advisors? Do you put together teams of mentors for your students?
We do. So a lot of the workload for advising and mentoring falls on the faculty administration for the School of Entrepreneurship. So we're fortunate to have a number of individuals like myself who are entrepreneurs by trade and have done a lot of work. But it's like what Peter does. It's building that connectivity to others that can add value. And again, we're seeing ideas across the spectrum. We're seeing software, hardware, physical food products, services company, game developers, clothing, all kinds of ideas across the university. So it's a little bit challenging to find the right resource to connect with the student the right way. We have a lot of experienced business people that want to help and add value, especially as alums. A lot of alums want to come back and add value. Part of the challenge can be sometimes, though, especially if you get an individual who's been in business, has been very successful over 30 or 40 years of their career. Sometimes they may not be quite relatable to the millennial student, the Gen Z student, and the kinds of things they're doing and how they think about new technologies and business models. So there can be sometimes a bit of a disconnect there that we have to help them bridge. But we try to find a lot of connectivity to the right people, obviously.
Mm-hmm. Do you have characteristics you're looking for in your mentors? How would you describe them?
So as much as we want our students to be coachable, we look for advisors.
Advisors who are coachable.
That they kind of listen again and understand what the person that's going to be the other side, right? Especially, again, the millennial and Gen Z individual, maybe their perspectives and backgrounds. But we'll be looking for either highly technical skills or broad business skills, and it will really be a wide mix. It comes down to the individual and what they're capable of learning. We want them to learn from our students too, and hopefully a really good mentor, advisor's doing that, right? They want to learn as much as they're going to be giving advice. Enthusiasm, all that, yeah.
One of the main requirements that we have of our mentors is they have to have done it.
They have to have done it?
Yeah, they have to have been an
They
entrepreneur.
have to give you proof they've done it?
Well-
Or can they just talk like they've done it?
No, they pretty much have to, they have to have a track record, so they know the problem.
Yeah, you do any due diligence on it?
We do, yeah.
Okay. Check their story?
Absolutely.
Okay. Chuck, tell us one of your student deals that has worked out well.
So, just think about this question about student deals, student success, how do we measure success and what's been well? And as an academic institution, it's important to recognize that one of our key metrics of success is that they actually graduate, right? And you think about that, what we don't want is to bring students, especially undergraduate students, into our program, into our incubator, and they move so fast, and they get to Ben Franklin and they raise money, and then they get the Science Center and get a lot of support, and then they don't graduate. So, one of our main goals, obviously, that they graduate with us. So we try to help them find that balance. So that's a key measure of success for us, is that. But beyond that, then one of the things that we do with students is really help them understand what are their goals and how are they going to measure success or failure. And I think we all know that most startups fail in some way, shape, or form. But how you define success and failure is also very specific to the individual and the team. I actually teach a course called Ready, Set, Fail, and it's a course about failure, and we look at failure and resilience and how you think about success and failure. But in terms of things that we've been that have been interesting to us over the past few years that have been very prominent and been in the news. So we had a student who was on Shark Tank a couple of years ago. He created a scholarship search mobile application that so far has been quite successful in the market, and it's gone to raise some significant capital. We've had some very early stage Internet of Thing type companies that have rolled out of our incubator that have gone on to raise capital and are building out their product. We see a number of successful crowdfunding campaigns that have gone on to raise six figures through those programs like Kickstarter and Indiegogo. But again, we're seeing them very, very early, and our goal really is to try to get them ready so that they're ready for the Science Center, they're ready for Ben Franklin, they're ready for other investors, and that becomes a good measure of success for us. So, excuse me, have we gotten them ready? Have they then been able to go on, leave our incubator, and go off and start to really transform themselves into a real business?
When you're getting them ready, are there techniques that you've developed at Drexel that you think are particularly effective?
It's a great question, Robert. One of the things that we put heavy emphasis on, especially in the beginning, is to really help the student learn how to validate whether or not their idea has a customer at the other end of it. We see a lot of ideas, but they've not really put a lot of thought into, is there a customer? What would their distribution strategy be? How could they build this thing? So we spend a lot of time on the upfront part of the process. So if any of you are familiar with the lean startup methodology, we subscribe quite a bit, not in its purest forms, because we think there's some, it doesn't always quite work out, especially for certain types of businesses. But we really try to put a lot of heavy emphasis on how do you de-risk some of your very early assumptions about what's the problem, who's the customer, and is this the right solution? We kind of start there. And then once they figure that out, then we can start to help them think about channel strategies, go-to-market strategies, revenue model strategies, and kind of take them through that journey. Coupling all that with heavy emphasis on the team development, because again, that's where we see a lot of the companies fall apart, the wheels fall off quite easily, because especially as students, trying to put an effective team together is quite challenging because they're in college and they have a lot of other things going on. And Drexel, especially being a co-op school, they go off and work, and it creates a lot of other barriers to success. So we try to help them with a number of aspects, both in terms of the commercialization, but also in terms of the team development.
Peter, you spend a lot of time building teams. How do you do that?
It's art and science. Going back to a previous comment, I'm looking for somebody, particularly on the business lead side, who is enthusiastic. We would love to have domain expertise, but if they have domain experience and they're enthusiastic and they're engaged, that's a key part for us. You can't coach enthusiasm.
Leadership skills.
Yeah, absolutely. Not to be pejorative, oftentimes the technical team, it's a little bit herding cats. They have a lot of other focuses, and that's fine. Again, they're academics and they have their own focuses. I'm looking for somebody who can marshal that energy and excitement and help understand and manage expectations of what this process is actually going to look like. It's not going to be a case of, in 6 months, we're going to have an IPO. It's going to take years, particularly for a lot of the healthcare technologies that I'm looking at. It's 6, 10, 12 years. There's a regulatory pathway. And we want to make sure everybody understands up front, including the business lead that we bring in, that this is going to be a process. And here's what the process looks like, and we're going to be here, and we have partners out there that are going to help with this process. But making sure everybody understands up front that it's going to be a process.
And a team, once you've assembled a team, it includes the business lead and who else?
It's going to be the technical team, so typically the PIs.
Yes.
Potentially postdocs, grad students, the business lead, and then within a year or two of us getting some funding, additional funding, starting to look at employees 2 through 10.
Okay. And do you have a deal you like to talk about when you're sharing your success stories with the world?
Yes.
What would you like to share?
I have a great example. It's a technology that came out of the University of Delaware. This goes back 4 years, so as I said, I oversee both the proof of concept program and phase 1 ventures at the Science Center. And the first time that I met with the PI, her first question was, "Is this going to be like Shark Tank?" And I said, no, it's not going to be nearly as bad as that.
Yeah.
And it goes back to, it's going to be a process, and we're going to be here to help. So she is a nursing instructor, and her technology is working with simulated patients. So there are certain types of activities that nursing students work on that simulated patients would not cotton to. Tracheostomies are the first one. So this is the first product is a chest plate, and Mark knows about this because Ben Franklin has invested. And it's a chest plate that goes onto the simulated patient, and if you're getting a tracheostomy, you have a tube down your throat so you can't verbally respond, you would just react. But this has sensors so the students know if they hit the wrong side. It's like playing Operation if you were little. So, you can imagine that a regular simulated patient would not do that many times in a row. And they're building it out. The next one is for catheters. Again, you can imagine why people wouldn't volunteer for that. And I've literally shepherded this technology for the last 4 or 5 years. Her name is Amy Copperthwaite. She is just utterly and completely dynamic, but she was very upfront. She's like, I know this technology, I'm passionate about it, but I need help guiding it through. And we were able to bring in a chief operating officer to help her get through her first round of funding, and they're just going gangbusters right now. So it's my flagship.
And you attribute that to your brilliance, right, Peter? No. That was so.
Yeah.
You attribute that to her being dynamic, number one.
Yep.
But then there was a market.
Yeah, absolutely. There was a utter and complete market there. The competitor, quote unquote, are these mannequins that cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, and they break down, and it was not a great technology. And she recognized an opportunity and a need, and they've just had tremendous feedback and support from the market. She goes to trade shows and they're like, I want to order X. And she's like, okay, we're going to get there, to Mark's earlier point about scaling up. How do you actually scale up? And we're helping with that process.
So Mark, your organization has only been around for about 200 years, is that right?
No, no, no. 35 years.
35, oh, only 35 years. Well, so what would be a recent success and something you've learned from it?
So one that's kind of in the news recently, very recently, is a company called Lea Diagnostics. And this Lea Diagnostics has developed a flushable pregnancy test. We have a program we call FabNet. Ben Franklin has a program we call FabNet. So FabNet is our grant program. It's the only grant program that we have. We'll pay half the cost of a project, up to $5,000, to develop these things. So Beth from Lea started with this idea. She came to us and said, I have this idea for a flushable pregnancy test. Really not knowing how to do it or where to start. And we used FabNet, so we granted her $5,000. So our $5,000, her $5,000, $10,000. She did a series of experiments on the media that she would use that would end up being the flushable media. From that, she came back to us for a technology acceleration loan. These are $50,000 loans that we do. And from that, she was able to actually develop a prototype, an actual functional prototype. And since then, she's come back to us for, I'm not sure, somewhere in the area of $400,000. And she's gotten her FDA approval. This was the big news recently. She's gotten her FDA approval, and this thing ought to be on the market before the end of the year. But I'll give you another example because it's very different, and I think it's maybe more relatable to our audience here. Is Temple developed a technology that lowers the viscosity of fluids, and they're using it in the oil and gas industry. And they built this device on a bench, and by aligning the particles in the fluid, you're able to reduce viscosity without getting too technical. And this has some benefits. So we decided that maybe we ought to look at the chocolate industry. So again, we used FabNet, and we took it to a little accelerator out in Malvern called Amtech. And we put our $5,000 in there, and they designed what this thing would have to look like, kind of a pilot scale chocolate viscosity reducer. And so for $10,000, they designed it. They came back for the 50. They actually built this kind of a skid-mounted pilot unit. And then we took it to one of the largest chocolate manufacturers on the East Coast. They've looked at it. We're able to reduce the viscosity of chocolate as it's flowing by about 10%. This is worth a lot of money. Operationally, this is worth a lot of money to these chocolate guys because it reduces the time to transfer chocolate tank to tank, load trucks, unload trucks. They're very excited about it. And now we're looking at selling this Temple technology to this large chocolate company.
Somebody out here in the audience probably has a technology to reduce the viscosity of fluid in a pipe.
Probably do.
That they could add on to your technology and make it more robust. So would any of you like to share one story about a failure and what you learned from your failure? I'll let somebody raise their hand.
I'll talk about a kind of a, I don't want to say typical, but it's not unique. It happens frequently. It's that when companies will they go out to raise money on a kind of a crowdfunding campaign, and they'll raise a lot of money, somewhere between $30,000 and $100,000, and they use that money to develop their product. Of course, the people who put the money in, there are no guarantees, but if the company's going to be successful, they want to protect their reputation. They do want to deliver on that eventually, but they get themselves in a trap because they raise this money, they spend all the money in development, and now they have no money to get the product, to manufacture the product and get it back to the customers. So what do? They look for investors, and they end up giving away large chunks of their company to get this money, and they get themselves deeper and deeper in debt. And the sad thing is, I've seen companies that have really it's just a very good product. It's really a better mousetrap, but now they're literally millions of dollars in debt, and no investor will touch them. And as a result, they never get this product to market. They've got patents or something, they end up selling it for 10 cents on the dollar. They go bankrupt, and someone else, hopefully, somebody else will pick up that patent and get that product to market. But more times than not, it just dies. And it was a better mousetrap, but because it was mismanaged, the company was mismanaged, it never got to market.
The financing was messed up.
Yeah.
If I could mention something like that with failure. So our job, obviously, is at very early stages to help them figure out before they even get down that path that they're going to have some challenges, and there's this concept of fail fast, which you never want to fail, and that failure is a very bad thing. But what we certainly want them to do is to try to figure out as early as possible to anticipate where the biggest risks are going to be and try to de-risk those sooner. But we still have some that plow ahead. And example, the crowdfunding campaign, we had a startup that very successful in terms of raising a crowdfunding campaign, really struggled with getting the product built. They made a lot of missteps along the way with a hardware product, with sourcing manufacturing in China. Eventually was able to get the product built and shipped to them, but then they messed up on the shipping, and they didn't anticipate international shipping costs, and they were never able to fully deliver their product that they had sold through the crowdfunding campaign, and essentially had to wrap it up. And they had it was a good it was a better mousetrap, but there's execution missteps along the way because they didn't really anticipate some of those downstream things that are the realities of starting a business.
Great lessons. Peter, have you ever done a deal with a federal laboratory?
I haven't had the chance yet, but I do have a current technology in one of my portfolios that has expressed interest in pairing with Argonne Lab, which I mentioned to you earlier.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just a quick pitch in case there's anybody from Argonne here in the room. But we had some initial conversations, and it seemed like a great fit, and we're hoping to pursue that opportunity. And as I mentioned to you earlier, this has been a great educational experience for me to learn more about how many federal labs there are out there and what the opportunities are. In one of my portfolios, I have 25 teams. In my other portfolio, I've got 35 teams. So finding opportunities to work with federal labs, I'm really excited about. So, yeah.
Chuck or Mark, have you had a chance to work with the federal laboratory?
So I've interacted with federal labs several times. When I was with Certainty, we did a lot of work with Oak Ridge, which was a completely different relationship than now when I'm working with these startups. Also, so recently, working in the entrepreneurial community, we've had some experience working with DOE labs and with NASA. The DOE, there was a DOE project at the Navy Yard started, I guess, 2010 or something like that, called the EEB Hub, the Energy Efficient Building Hub. It was $150 million. And one of the things, Ben Franklin was a partner in that, and one of the things that we attempted to do at DOE's request was to identify some ready-to-be commercialized technologies and put them into our commercialization center. The EEB Hub had a commercialization center. So the idea was identify maybe 10 technologies that were of interest for energy efficiency in commercial buildings, pull them out, they're close to commercialization, put some teams around it, do a kind of a business plan contest, and put them into our commercialization center and grow companies. Didn't really work out for us. It was very difficult to find these technologies. We did, in fact, use the technology locator tool, or we tried to use that. That didn't work out for us too well either. What we ended up doing is looking at I think DOE has 17 labs, so we went to the websites of each of the 17 labs within DOE and pulled what we thought were the most interesting technologies. And we did end up finding actually 6 technologies that we put out there. We had our contest, and we got a winner, and it was a happy ending, but the way we got there was different than the way we had hoped to get there originally.
I want to come back to that before we're done.
All right.
But Chuck, have you had a chance to look at the technology, the T2 tool set?
Yeah, I have. And to the question of have we interfaced with federal labs, to date we haven't, but I would certainly, having learned quite a bit more about it over the past few days, would love to do that. Drexel has a technology commercialization transfer office, and one of the things that we always work with our students on, and we've run classes around this, is let's go look at some of the IP that Drexel has, and instead of thinking, instead of worrying about creating your own ideas, your own IP, let's see what's out there, right? There's an opportunity to accelerate what you're doing by licensing existing IP, and I have a sense that there's quite a bit of IP that you all are working on, that there's an opportunity to leverage that with some really bright minds and entrepreneurial skill development and really accelerate some things into the market. So I was looking at the toolkit, and it looks like there's a very good structure there for taking someone through that journey, taking them through that process of let's see what's out there, let's pick something, let's look at the commercial opportunity, and again, that's the stuff that we really excel at, which is how do we take an idea and think about the commercial opportunity, and then put someone on a pathway to examine that over the course of a year or so, and then if there's something at the other end, then let's go get some funding for it. So I think that the toolkit sets up well in terms of a process and a set of tools to facilitate something like that. There might be an opportunity from federal lab perspective to how do you embed that further, deeper inside a number of universities, and it might be interesting to do a trial on something like that and see where we could go with that.
Further, deeper. What do you mean by that? It's like,
Build a program. Let's build a specific partnership, specific program. Let's try something. It could be done as a competition. It could be done in context of a class. Do a bit of feasibility analysis. Just see what bubbles up. There's no guarantees, obviously, but I think there's an opportunity to build some type of a specific program with one or more universities and find a way to build a bit of a process there and see what comes out of it.
we're going to, in about 3 or 4 minutes, going to start asking questions. And if you have a question, if you'd go to one of the microphones in the middle of the room. Peter, have you tried the tool set technology?
Yeah, I've had a chance to run through it, and again, I think it's going to be a really valuable tool for the companies in my portfolios to start identifying future opportunities. It seems pretty well laid out, so I'm really excited to engage those teams in the tool set.
So this opportunity to be on this panel has given you guys an opportunity to learn a little bit about the federal laboratories and the resource that they represent. If you were to write the script saying, here's what I would like the federal labs to do to help us here in Philadelphia do our work, what would that look like? How would you write that?
So I did spend a couple hours on that technology tool locator, and I went back to the original project, right, energy efficient buildings, and I typed it in, and I ended up getting a list of labs. So that didn't do it for me. So to answer your question, if I were going to build something here new and different to try to identify technologies or match technologies, I would think about some kind of a matchmaking service, somebody who would actually have a one-on-one relationship, a responsibility to communicate with somebody who's trying to solve a problem. Many of the companies that we work with, they're developing these technical products. They run into a technical problem. The solution is probably out there. They don't know it.
Yeah.
So what they need is a way to say, here's my problem, and who can help me find a technology that's out there that will help me solve my problem. But it's going to take a kind of a one-on-one ownership from the federal lab side, because another thing we ran into was when we did identify these technologies, there's a person's name associated with each one of these technologies. Some of the people that we reached out to were very responsive, some that didn't respond at all. So if they're not responding at all, they're no help. But so somebody needs to kind of there needs to be a matchmaking service, and there needs to be a kind of a one-on-one relationship. Somebody who knows the system, who can navigate the system, who can help people find solutions to their problems.
A human who's the navigator for you.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think one thing I'd like to see, and it kind of speaks to the keynote speaker regarding innovation ecosystems and districts, and we spend a lot of time on that because we're really part of one here in the city of Philadelphia. But to see federal labs, the FLC, be present in some of these ecosystems, be a bit more present, and that could be just by representatives coming to certain events, making yourself known. I think there's not a lot of knowledge out there about the labs and FLC as an organization, and just finding ways to get further embedded and start to build those relationships, because those collisions do matter and good things come of that. And we've all been party to that here, certainly in Philadelphia, in terms of how do you make innovation happen. And we talked a bit at breakfast about how over the past few years the city of Philadelphia, in terms of an entrepreneurial and innovation ecosystem, is really it's just been substantially built up. But that happens by just being present. So I think it would be interesting to see a bit more intersection between federal labs, FLC, and some of the innovation things are happening in Philly or whatever city you're near, or innovation district that you're near.
What do you think, Peter?
I'll echo those comments. I think the tool is a great first step. It's a gateway, but to have those personal relationships in place and continue to build those over time is going to be critical to it. That we identified that there was an opportunity at Argonne, and we didn't have any personal contact. And we tried to figure out how we could make some personal contacts there, and we tried, and it sort of worked out. But it's going to be critical to be able to utilize the tool to identify where there might be resources, but also to have those personal relationships in place as the second step.
Have a way to gain those.
Yeah,
A
exactly.
warm introduction
Yep.
kind of thing.
Yes.
Okay. And
One more thought on
One
that.
more
One more thought.
before we go to questions.
One of the things that
Anybody have questions, stand up at the mics.
One of the things that does work very well for us are SBIRs, right? SBIR grants. So if there's a way to, when a company gets an SBIR grant, to match that with maybe some work that's going on in a federal lab, that's very well received, very well utilized here, the SBIR grant. So to be able to maybe put the work that the company is doing with the SBIR grant together with a federal lab, that's another option or an opportunity for the two to work together.
I think that's possible. People are doing that out there. Okay, well, listen, any questions before we go?
Just one.
Well, here's one. Go ahead. Stand up here so they can collect your voice.
Thanks for coming to give talks today. You mentioned matchmaking in terms of capabilities and so forth. At our laboratory, we have thousands of different technological capabilities. I think probably some of the utility for those in the audience to share some of the general capabilities out there so that you can search and do some of the matchmaking that you're talking about. So right now, I think in the Technology Hub, we're talking about specific licensable technologies and so forth, but it seems like sometimes you need capabilities that one of the labs may already have, and several of them probably routinely utilize. So would that be something that, if posted on there, that we all in the audience contributed to, would help you all maybe solve, or some of these companies?
So I think certainly that's one of the things that we did with NASA. In fact, was NASA was we were touring, and they were opening their facility to allow us and our companies to be able to utilize some of those capabilities. That's very worthwhile. But at the same time, finding a technology that will solve a problem as you're developing a product is different than just having those capabilities. So the answer to your question is yes, we would welcome that, but at the same time, I still need help finding a solution to my technical problem.
Any other questions? Okay, we're right on time for the break. Thank you all very much.